Well, welcome. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today we're going to be talking with Brenda Lee about negotiation and leadership. And you are in for a treat. Brenda is an absolute powerhouse. I can't wait for the conversation. For those of you who don't know her, she's the CEO of Modig Leadership, and she's a leadership expert who challenges audience to get to the root of those leadership gaps. And apparently she has quite a knack for doing that. And the thing I thought was interesting is that she's got a very strong background in computer coding, and she now uses that to help recode our brains. And we could all use a little bit of that. So welcome, Brenda. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
So why don't you kickstart us off? Tell us how you came to do this line of work.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story. So honestly, I was married, got divorced, and it landed me in a divorce circle. Wow. I was a general contractor. I had my own company with a partner on general contracting, and I was like, this is not fulfilling. And so at some point I asked like three of my closest friends within the course of a month, I was like, what should I do? And they're like, all three of them said, go be a coach. And I'm like, everybody wants to be, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's so stupid. This is like this train bandwagon bull crap. And they're like, Brenda, like seriously, you act coach, speak coach, talk coach. And I was like, I sat and I thought about it and I was like, you know what, this could work. And I had reverse engineered my divorce where I was raised in a really legalistic religion. And I know you talk about conditioning, Cindy, so you get this, where it was like this thing where I can't walk away from this divorce unless I felt like I did my work. So I started doing my work before I left the marriage. I knew I had massive baggage from my parents that I had to deal with. And I came out of this. And as I was sitting there pondering coach, I was like, I know the keys to the kingdom to get people over divorce. So it's the average time it takes people to get over divorce is 7 years. It doesn't have to be that way. Anyway, so I created a curriculum, long and short of it, launched it. And I just I have a bunch of corporate and business ownership background myself. Yeah. And those were the level of my clients that came to me. And one had said at one point, like, this has nothing to do with divorce. I've got this gal that just got a severance package after 13 years of a company. Can you please help her? Like, she's lost her identity. And I said, absolutely. And I was like, I can just translate it. He's like, can you do that? And I was like, done and done. It's all the same. It's all the same information, Cindy. Yeah. Right. And then an entrepreneur. So that started the executive side of it. And then an entrepreneur got a hold of me and said, holy crap, if my team knew this, we would go through the roof. And can you please translate? And I was like, in my slate, like done. I was like, sure, why not? Right. So here we go. And that started the leadership development. And that honestly is my favorite space. I've since retired the divorce coaching. It's great, but the corporate is just so much more fun.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And actually it's right. It really resonated with me when you said about that baggage around coaching, because I had the same, right? After 30 years.
Did you?
And I'm like, oh, coaching, that just seems so cliche. But then I started doing coaching and getting some of the sort of leaders in the industry. And I'm like, this is really valuable. This is a very undervalued field. And we have no baggage around getting coaching for athletics or music.
Exactly.
Or any other. So what the heck, right?
I know it. I know. And most of my clients that come to me, like they've seen multiple different counselors and it just doesn't cut it. There's some out there that are great, but I'm sorry, not sorry. They're keeping them on the couch instead of where do we want to go? Like I'm done talking about the past. I mean, we've got to unpack some things for sure and deal with it so that you can move forward and get to where you want to be instead of being stuck. So
I love that. And I know that your sort of signature model helps really build great teams, which is so often overlooked and so important, especially these days in the face of the Great Resignation. So share some of the secret sauce. What is the secret sauce to building those great teams in an organization?
Yeah. Oh, Cindy, I'm so glad you asked that question because here's the reality. We go about team leadership. Our company does so differently. So many companies come with like a one size, like one box fits all kind of a deal. And they jump right into the teamwork. And the reality is you're only as good as your weakest link. And people know that, yet for some reason, they kind of just like dismiss this, like, well, this isn't about P&Ls and this isn't about profitability. And this isn't, you can't put numbers to this. So they dismiss this area of this, not recognizing the critical importance of when you raise your individual employees up to their best level and then you do teamwork. Holy crap. They're all elevating to a level that nobody even knew could exist as a team, but you have to start with the individual first. And I really feel like that's what's missing in the industry. And we're kind of disrupting that in the sense where, I mean, everybody's like, that is not at all what we expected for corporate training. And it was the best training we've had, right? Because people are hungry for this after COVID. They're hungry for connection. It wasn't a pandemic of an illness. It was a pandemic of community, right? We lost community and emotional connection people need is just critical. It's just critical.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting you mentioned COVID because I think people are open to a new way of being.
Yes.
The first time, certainly in my lifetime, I would say, like truly looking at what does constitute good leadership skills. That old competitive model maybe that's
Yes.
not the best way to go. So I'm kind of thrilled to see that
Yeah.
shift of perspective where we're recognizing, and again, I hate using that sort of, I get resistance on whether you call it feminine or masculine, but like we all have masculine and feminine
Yes.
energy, but definitely getting
Right.
away from that competitive model to a more
Yes.
collaborative model.
Ah, yes. I was just talking about this with a company, with one of my companies about their sales teams, because sales teams are so competitive. They're like, they're not going to share secrets among team members.
I
And
know.
I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, you have the most brilliant people here. If you guys would collaborate, you could share. Like, if you're great with this one collective group of people that are super outgoing, then I'm going to give you those clients. If you're great with the introverts, you need those. It just doesn't make sense to me. So getting them in a collaborative space where their ego drops a little bit, they're willing to share and collaborate, and they recognize how much better we are together instead of separate and individual. We're connected anyway. That's what people don't. We want to think we're disconnected. We want to think we can disconnect home and work, and you can't. We're holistic beings and we're all connected. So we might as well take advantage of that and leverage it to their profitability instead of leaving it on the table.
Totally love it. And definitely a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
as we help the people beside us elevate, it elevates us with them. And that's the, it's that scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset that makes such a difference. On that. So what advice would you have for our listeners out there for in their organizations? I get like focusing on that individual. What are some of the key things, steps that they can be taking to move in that direction, to start giving that assistance to those individuals? What are the key areas that you'd suggest they start looking at?
Yeah, well, really evaluating their team. And oftentimes people want to pull in like DISC assessment or Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs and do all these boxes again, right? Like we're going to shove them in these boxes instead of just sitting back and evaluating like, who is this person? Is this person outgoing? What do I desire for this position? And who is this person? And are they a match, right? Like when we slow down and emotionally connect with people on an internal level where we're willing to be present with them, we're willing to engage with them, we're willing to hear what they have to say, right? Now we get to know this person on a whole different level. The more you know them, the more you can place them correctly, the more you can support them correctly, the more you can improve their skill set correctly, right? In a way that actually helps and benefits them instead of tears them down or causes resentment or all those kind of things. So people really underestimate the importance of really getting to know their people. We've got to know our people.
Nurture them to shine, right? Whereas so many organizations, when you're pitting everybody against each other,
oh my gosh,
everybody is in such a place of constant nervous reaction that they can't shine their best self. So I love that approach. Now, I know communication is obviously a really key element of your work. And obviously that's a skill that's really integrally connected with negotiation, which is one of my So I'd love if you could share some of maybe your top tips on effective communication. You've seen a bunch of the to-dos and don'ts, maybe.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I always say you never get to say always and never, except for in a few cases, right? So oftentimes I'll change their language in the way that they communicate with each other. And instead of like saying, we've got a problem, we say we have a challenge. And you'll get this into subconscious, right? When we say we've got a problem, immediately your subconscious is like, oh crap, like this is something we can't deal with. And you start to shut down creativity. You start to stop exploring other options. And then you start to, well, it's always been done this way, so we must fix it this way again, right? Well, when we say we've got a challenge, especially if you're competitive, now most leaders are competitive, right? That's a characteristic that most leaders come with. So you say, hey, we've got a challenge. Who's in, right? Now they're leaning in and they're guided. And it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it because now the brain says, how can we solve this? Instead of, are we going to be able to solve this? It's how can we? And when we say the how can we, the brain is a goal achieving machine, right? When we say, how can we solve this? The brain says, we can solve this. And then it starts hunting for that solution. So your creative side of your brain, your left side of brain kicks in. Now you're coming up with unconventional suggestions and ideas and thoughts and solutions that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So I really changed their language. We don't say, but we say, and, right? Like those little things, would you be willing to, instead of, can you go do this? Anybody can go take the trash out. Anybody can go make a copy of this handbook. Would you be willing to do this? And as leaders, we feel like we're losing our authority by doing that, by saying, would you be willing? Like we're asking them. And nobody on the planet says no when you say, hey, would you be willing to, right? They feel valued.
Is so important, right? Even just, you have to do this, or even when you hear people within the organization saying, oh, I have to do this, as opposed to, I have the opportunity to do this, right? Subtle but profound mindset shifts in terms of how we frame it. And what you're describing is so important in organizational structure, but also in those negotiations, right? Being able to shift that language. Okay, here's a challenge. Let's work together to overcome it, as opposed to, I want this and you want that, and let's fight over who gets what or what piece on the spectrum. spectrum, as opposed to what if we saw this as a challenge where we could come up with even better solutions, better
Yes.
options. So that should be
So
a mindset.
it is. And you know what? It really, I mean, even within my own negotiations and sales, where it's really critical, where if they understand, and again, I know you know this because I've listened to your work, if they understand that we're with them for the end goal, and like you said, we don't have to, we get to solve this challenge. We get to come up with solutions. We get to go to work. We get to overcome something that this industry, I was working with a security company and they're like, oh, we just have this rollout and every time this is how it goes. And I was like, hold on. What if you get to be the one company that this has always been done this way, and you get to come up with a different solution that's better, faster, people are excited to do it. And if you would get rid of that limiting mindset, like you said, step into this possibility that you can have, that you can create all kinds of whatever you want to create and better solutions, and then roll that out to the rest of the industry. That now, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that challenge instead of, oh God, we got to do this? You know what I mean?
It's so good. So good.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always see negotiation and leadership as so connected, right? Like many of the key skills that make for effective negotiators are those same skills that make for those best leaders. So I'd love your thoughts on the relationship between leadership and negotiating.
Well, Cindy, I don't know that anybody can say it best other than what you've said, where we negotiate life everywhere, everything, all the time. And I really start with part of this. Of course, I very much come from the heavily emotional intelligence portion, right? Where we've got to have emotional intelligence with people. If we can't learn to connect with people, depending on the study, 90 to 95% of our decisions are based out of emotions. And when we're emotionally dysregulated, and you get this is how negotiations go south. When someone's dysregulated in their emotions and then they get triggered and they're hyped up in their emotions, now they've lost the sale, right? They've lost the goal that they're trying to achieve, which often is helping someone else. We say sales, but really I'm there to make your company a rock star, right? So now not only am I losing out on a sale, but you're losing out on this opportunity to improve your whole team, right? And so anyway, it just is it's a non-negotiable that when we get that emotional buy-in from our subordinates, our employees, our coworkers, and they're bought into the why of why we're all here emotionally, negotiation is a no-brainer in that regard, right?
Yeah. I love it. And I mean, so important and in some ways so simple and obvious, and yet overlooked almost all the time in most major organizations. We're seeing the shift, thank goodness.
Yes.
And thank goodness people like you are out there doing the great work you do. And speaking of your great work, I know one of the things that you really get touted for is your ability to just cut to the core of problems that are plaguing workplaces. So what are some of the key problems that you encounter and how do you suggest we fix them?
Well, okay. So coming out of COVID, one of the massive problems, and it's shifting now, Cindy, this is just recent within 6 months to a year, probably more so, just even in the 6 months, HR used to be a huge obstacle for the work that I do, right? Where they're like, we can't talk about vulnerable things. You can't press in and ask how your home life is. Yes, you can. Do you know that CEO who's making $700,000 a year and is getting a divorce has lost 50% productivity? And if you're not supporting him in that, instead of saying, oh, your performance is down, now you're fired, because people are afraid to go to HR with this kind of stuff. COVID has really opened up their eyes on the HR side to say, holy crap, we need help. This is HR's there for a reason. They're there to protect the company. They need to be, right? And they can't step into this space because they're terrified of crossing the lines. Well, that's where a third party like me gets to come in as an independent contractor and do that work with their team so that they're now able to be vulnerable with each other and support each other and say, dude, you're struggling today. Your wife just served you yesterday. How can I help you today? I get to help you. I'm in a great, strong space. So let me support you somehow, even with your work, and collaborate that way and get everybody through the real deal of life. So
so beautiful. And I just want to put a pin in that for our listeners as well, because I think that is such a key point, this idea around vulnerability, because on so many levels, it was a dirty word in the workplace for so long, right? I mean, people, and when we talk about that masculine and feminine energy, we all rejected it. It was seen, that was the ultimate sign of weakness if you showed vulnerability in the workplace, right? Or beyond, frankly, even in our personal and professional relationships. I know I was brought up that way. Never cry, never show your hurt, never show that vulnerability or people are going to take advantage. And it took a lot of time and work to really recognize that the more we open up and stop holding our cards so close to our chest, the more creative opportunities that will present themselves. So I love that you actually do that work with your corporate clients. I think that's so powerful.
Well, I was just going to say, like usually, honestly, Cindy, when I do a speaking engagement or corporate training, right, I start out with this bag of stuff and it's like this blanket of shame of divorce and this wine bottle when I was going through divorce as a freaking alcoholic and the yoga mat though, because my ex was addicted to pornography. So I had to look perfect. So I'm hungover. The room is spinning in downward dog, staring at the floor, but I got to look perfect. So by God, we're going to get through it. Right. And so this is where I start. And this is a critical component, I really believe, for leaders. The reason I do that is so they see that I'm real. We all have our own bag of crap. Yours might look different than mine, but every single human on the planet has it. There's no way around it. And two, I lead by example. We cannot lead our people unless we're leading by example. I can't get up there and talk about vulnerability if I don't open up the kimono, right? And we have to do that as leaders. And it's so underestimated. And people are so afraid of their emotions and shame around shit that they've gone through. And the reality is we all have. It's okay.
And
it's okay.
Shame and stigma. And I knew I liked you, Brenda. My goodness, it's funny. It reminded me, I spoke recently at a conference for one of my large trade union clients, and they had people from Canada and the US. And the whole theme of the conference was about mental health. And I put my hand up. I'm like, I want to speak. I'm happy to speak on that issue. Right. So, and they had a number of speakers there who were great. And again, though, focusing on the, the technical, and here's the things you can do. And I thought somebody has to crack this open by being vulnerable. So I just got up and said, we've got a long history of mental health problems on both sides of my family. Let me share a few examples with you. And it just cracked the room open, right? Then people started sharing. So I love that that's your approach. And you had mentioned egos before, and I know you're really known as well for that ability to manage those big egos and strong personalities. So I'd love if you could tell us about managing ego, both in negotiations and in sort of leadership roles.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really believe that this really ties deeply into the feminine and masculine energy, right? Where, and I think we're similar. You've got boys, I've got boys. I had 3 older brothers. I was the only girl. You know what I mean? Like, so I've had to actually learn to step more into my feminine energy, right? It's really easy for me to be, right? Yeah. And people often say most of the companies I work with are men. And ironically, most of my divorce clients and executive clients were men. So they're seeking this permission to be vulnerable and tap into their emotions. And I was working with this other organization here just this summer, and they said, well, you can't put a woman in a room with men and have them share the things that they would share with men. And I was like, gloves are on. Like, let's do this, right? Like, you did not just say that. You know what I mean? Right? Because the reality is our feminine energy coupled with our ability to understand them at a masculine level, because we've experienced that, is safety for them. It's like the sister they didn't have. They get to open up and say all these things and share things that they wouldn't otherwise share with other people. Couple that again, though, that I lead with example. We have to lead by example. And if we can't ask people to do something we're unwilling to do.
So beautiful. And I love it because I'm sure through that process, it also allows them, when they start leaning into or expressing and giving themselves permission to recognize at least those feminine skills, they start to see the value in some of those feminine skills as well, and how they can bring those to their leadership to get better results from their team and beyond, I would think. I don't know what your experience has been.
Well, yes, because then they soften. They're like, oh, this is a safe space. I can soften. And now we can get real. I say all the time with my clients, I can only help you as far as you're willing to be transparent with me. If you're going to keep me back here, I'll only get here. If you're willing to let me in, we can uncover all kinds and really dig deep. Like you said, cut to the chase, get to the core of things. And, listen, people don't come to me unless they're ready to do that. Let's just be honest. Or it's not a good fit, right? Where we decide that we're not going to work with them. They really have to be ready to dive in and do the hard work. In fact, the name of the company, Modig, it means brave in Swedish. And it's brave work to get really deep and to get there. Yeah, it takes a lot of bravery.
I did not. Do you have Swedish background?
Not at all. Nope.
I love that. I did not know what it meant. I should have looked it up. Darn it. That's so good.
No, there's a really cool story about a guy. I mean, but do we have time for me to tell you the story?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So this was one of my earlier corporate clients as I was shifting into that corporate stuff, right? And I was talking with my business coach and I was talking to her about the bag. Well, one of the things is a baby doll, because I had an abortion and I had to forgive myself and I had to deal with that. And I packed that sucker around for decades before I even told anyone what I did, right? All that shame, all that guilt, like the society, what are they going to think of me? Anyway, I'm going into this retreat with this company and it's all men. There were 27 people in the room. 3 of us are women. I'm one of them. Okay.
I know those odds.
Yep. You do. You've done it. You totally do with your industry. So my coach was like, don't do the baby doll. And she's like, do the bag, but don't do the baby doll. And I was like, I'm going to do the baby doll. And she's like, don't do it. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I felt in my intuition, which I know you know this, like intuition's really important for me to follow my gut. There was this one guy, we're a day and a half in, he had not broke, Cindy. Every man in that room had broke. We had gotten some serious work done. In fact, he's the quote that says this wasn't another corporate rah-rah session. We actually got to this is that guy. Okay. So as we were diving into this, we get to this forgiveness exercise. Everybody's shared at that point. Everybody's broke. Everybody's had their moment, their breakthrough. When we say broke, like their breakthrough, right? Except for him. And I could see him something's going on, intuitives, like you get this, you can see that, oh, there's a crap storm going on over there. Like what's going on? Ask for people to share. He doesn't share. And I finally just call on him and I said, would you be willing to share? And he's like, I can't share this. And I sit down and kind of my cocky little masculine self, throw my arm on the chair. And I was like, it's okay. Like we've got all day. And I was like, surely you haven't murdered someone. Cause I can say that, right? For me, that's what it feels like about what I did, right? With the abortion. And he sits there and he starts quivering at this point. And he finally stands up and he says, no, he goes, but because of what I told her, she did. And he finally had his breakthrough. Oh, wow. And it was because of that. I sat there and I was like, holy crap, this takes serious bravery to step into your inner self and do your internal work, forgive yourself for things that you have not been able to forgive yourself for. And that translates, this is what people don't understand, especially with salespeople, that translates into how they show up in these negotiations. Absolutely. If they've got shame and guilt on a subconscious level, we can read that within like 0.3 seconds, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it holds us back, right? It holds us back from being the best version of ourselves.
Yes.
It creates a disconnect from trust because the other party doesn't know what, but they know there's some block between you and it causes them to immediately have a lack of trust.
Exactly.
And I love, Brenda, that you use that word, like that brave is the name of the company, because that bravery is seen as such a masculine quality, and tying that bravery to the vulnerability is such a powerful combination. I think that's gorgeous. And you had mentioned earlier creativity. It's funny, so many of the similar sort of themes and philosophies is with you. I'd love if you could speak to what role do you see creativity playing in negotiation and in leadership?
Oh, it's critical. I feel like it's a non-negotiable. Every single team I work with, every single client I work with, there is a unique dynamic with every single one. We're such unique beings. There's no two snowflakes that are the same. Even identical twins don't have the same DNA, right? And I call this, we've got the conditional gap. We've got social, parental, school, and religious conditioning that we're raised with, that we see through, plus our life experience. That becomes the lens with which we see life through. Your lens is radically different than mine, Cindy, right? And so when we come to the table and when we have a challenge, right, of how do we solve this the best way for you? Am I even the best fit for you? If I'm not, like, I'm sending you on your way, right? If I can't serve you well, it doesn't matter. But we don't know that until we get inquisitive, we're present, we're interested in genuinely desiring to know what this other person or company is struggling with. When we are able to get creative in our questioning, when we're present, we're emotionally engaged, that's when we can make the best assessment and then come up to the creative solutions that will be the best for them that some other box shop's not going to give them.
That is so good. And gosh, as soon as you said that about getting creative in the questioning, that is so profound. And it's curiosity, right? Like, get curious, show up with curiosity. It is such a game changer. And one thing you've mentioned a couple of times about that religious sort of conditioning, and I confess, I have not spoke to that often. And I know it can be such a dangerous taboo, but I think it's a really powerful point you've leaned on. And if you're comfortable just spending a bit chatting about that, I think it would be a real benefit to our listeners.
Yeah, I hit the bullseye, or like, I mean, I'm pretty bullish about that, right? So there's this, you guys can look this up there, look up an emotional scale, right? So let me back up. Like, everything is energy. I don't get it. I don't understand. It's above my pay grade, but I hit this desk. It's solid, but you put it under a microscope and it moves. I don't understand it. Does not make sense to me. However, our emotions are energy also, right? And they vibrate at different scales. And so when we are in disempowering emotions, and not that I like to call them disempowering instead of negative. People want to call them negative emotion. They're not emotion. We're so emotional and it's such a good thing. That fear saves us from getting eaten by the bear. Okay. We want that. When there's too much fear over something that's unnecessary, now, like you said, it's holding us back and we're not stepping into our essence and we're not showing up in a way that's going to get us a result that we're capable of getting because of all this conditioning. And so the religious conditioning, to circle back and answer your question, on that scale, so often religion causes shame and guilt. Guess what is the closest to stinking death? Shame and guilt on a scale of 100, and I think it's megahertz. Again, I'm not a scientist, but whatever. Love is at 1,000. I mean, you've got enlightenment. That's the most pure. But as far as what we generally experience as humans, love is the highest emotion. That's around 1,000, 800, 2,000. And shame is on the scale of 20. 0 is death. So religion, and I'm a believer, like I believe God, universe. I don't know what it is. The more I study it, the more I don't know, the more I'm okay with that. I am so okay with the fact that I don't know. And there's something there, right? There's something that connects us us all, and there's some energy, and I don't get it. But what I do get is that we operate in our best self when we're operating out of love, not out of shame and guilt. So I really am an advocate for putting to rest this religion, discover who God is for you, what this is, and step into your love. And we can only give or get what we have for ourselves. If we don't have love for ourselves, we can't give that to the people around us.
This is so gorgeous. And let me just point out for our listeners as well, and I've got to give you credit as well, Brenda, for practicing what you preach. A number of times now you've said, like, I just don't get it. And I find that one of the most powerful and refreshing things. We are so, speaking of conditioning, conditioned to believe that if we admit we don't know something, that's a sign of weakness and we don't want to ever do it and we'll lose credibility. And the opposite is true. The more we acknowledge the things we don't know, the more credibility we have, the more trust that we build, and the more space we open for the other party to show up from that same place of authenticity to get those best outcomes. So thank you for modeling that so beautifully for us. I think it's so important.
It's like refreshing to them. They're like, oh, you don't get it either? Like, thank you. I thought I was all alone. You know what I mean?
It's so true. Every time, whenever I've taught, even back long before I'd started my coaching practice, I do a lot of educationals for my trade union clients. And at the beginning of every seminar, I'm like, we don't have a lot of rules here, but one is there is no such thing as a stupid question. Because I guarantee you, if you have a question and you are brave enough to put your hand up, there are multiple other people in the room who had the same question, but were not brave enough to put their hand up. So
totally
I love it. Totally love it. Now, I know we've sort of been nibbling at the edge, and we talked about masculine and feminine energy and how it's not necessarily connected to gender, but I'd love your thoughts on what role, if any, gender plays in negotiation and leadership in your experience.
Well, I mean, let's get real, right? Like, we're conditioned and we live in a society where men carry the upper hand in that regard, right? And I do believe that COVID is also helpful in this regard as softening the landscape of negotiation. When people desire to be known and heard so desperately, right? It's one of the core basic human needs. And the dictatorship style doesn't allow for that. And so now that we've shifted out of this COVID and we're all hungry for real relationship, people are drawn more to this feminine style of negotiation. And they're more interested and intrigued, and they're leaning into it now in a way. Before, they really tried to delineate like church and state, home and work, and business and personal. And you can't do that. We're just too holistic human beings. You can't go toe to toe with your spouse or partner and then go into a boardroom meeting 5 minutes later and crush it. Unless you have the skill set, right? Like, if you've got the skill set that we train, that we do, then you're able to be emotionally regulated and box that up. And so the reality is, though, is like I said, everybody's softened in such a way. We're so hungry for connection, that feminine side of vulnerability, of empathy, of presence, right? Men are doers, they're doers. And so they're thinking of what they need to be doing next instead of just really engaging and looking eye with people. I mean, Bill Clinton won that stinking election because every time he looked at someone, they felt like they were the only human in the room. George Bush could walk by him and Bill Clinton would not even shift his eyes, right? Like, he was so present, but that feeling important and known and heard for people. And I feel like that's the feminine side that we get to bring, right? Where we get to nurture and love, and back to that whole love thing, we get to love them into their best organization, their best self, their best negotiating skills, whatever it is, we get to love them into that space.
And Clinton's such a great example. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking the same with Barack Obama, right? I mean, he was in a way where he made people feel like what they thought mattered, what they said mattered. Every individual felt validated. Such an important skill. So, and I love that you talked about COVID and tied that to that increased awareness about the feminine, because I've been speaking about that, and sometimes people scratch their heads. I'm like, take a look, like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, right? If you a decade ago had a prime minister of a country say that kindness was their national language, they would have been laughed off the global scene. And now people are like, I like that. And, so many people saying that the countries that had female leaders fared better in COVID. And I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't think it really matters. But what matters is that the value of feminine stock, if you will, those leadership qualities went up, which is a nice shift to see. And I love that you make that connection. So,
well, and I wish I could recall the actual article that I read, but I did just read this article that had said that women CEOs are actually more effective because of their level of empathy. They are able to engage, and driven women CEOs likely have some of that feminine energy too, but they're balanced now with this ability to connect with their people instead of just that dictator style.
And the beauty of that, I just to piggyback on that thought, Brenda, as well, I think now with COVID and this shift, it's given permission, because I think a lot of CEOs brought that EQ to the table, those female, but felt they had to stifle it. And I know even in my practice for many years, it was like, it was the dirty secret that I had to kind of stifle it. And now there's permission. lean into it. Like that is the
Yes.
secret weapon, right? So
Yes.
I think it's
Amen, sister. I love it. Yep. Totally.
now, when we talk about those different energies, what advice or, tips do you have for negotiating with bullies or for people who have maybe more power in a negotiation or in a workplace situation?
Well, let's just get real, Cindy. Like usually if they're bullies, they've got an ego. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, again, you can only give or get what you have for yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm a firm believer if they're bullying other people, they're bullying themselves internally with that
Yeah.
self-talk that's going on and that conditioning. They're believing all the conditioning instead of really stepping into what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And when you come at those people even more gentle and even more present and
Yes.
even more engaged and leaning in more and holding this safe space for them that they can't even hold for themselves, those walls come down radically
Oh,
very, very quickly.
yeah.
And that's where, like I said, I mean, I deal with powerhouse men, right? Like that's my demographic of my clientele. And I have yet to have one that says that you weren't safe. Like I couldn't go here
Yeah.
with you.
That's
They're
so
pouring out things that they haven't told their spouse after 24 years of marriage. You know what I mean? Because it's finally a safe space. Not that, I'm not going to take that role, but it's a safe
Yeah.
space and teaching them how to get into that space themselves. So now they can go home and teach not only their spouse, but now the coworkers and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, so powerful. Yeah. And I find I often say, like, when you invite somebody to be the best version of themselves, even when
Yeah.
they're not, especially when they're not actually showing up in that way, like it's, if
Yes.
somebody's really bullying, I find it can be so powerful to just say, I know that treating people with dignity and respect is something that's really important to you.
I've heard you say that.
And it often really makes them take that step to kind of go, oh, and they shift. Or the other thing, I call it elevated active listening. And it's what you just talked about, Brenda. It's so powerful. Not only repeat back what you've heard them say, but do it in the most gracious, complimentary way possible. You make their argument even better than they could have. And when somebody's trying to bully their way through, I find more often than not, there's this profound shift that takes place and it triggers that reciprocity where all of a sudden they're more open to listening. So I love your advice. That was great.
Yeah, I love it.
We talked about emotion a couple of times here as well. I'd love what role, if any, do you see as emotion playing in either leadership role and or in negotiations?
Well, like I said, it's critical. I mean, 90 to 95% of our decisions are based out of emotions. 95% of our purchasing decisions are based out of emotions. So when you think of sales teams and all that kind of stuff, if their emotional home, like we said earlier, if their emotional home isn't sound, there's a subconscious energy exchange between you and the potential client, and they don't trust you. They don't know why. Their subconscious just says, nope, shutting it down, and they have no clue. So when salespeople in particular do this individual work and they are showing up as their best, authentic, trustworthy, vulnerable self, now it's a no-brainer. Like the sales rates go through the roof and they don't understand why. And it's simply because their energy that they bring to the table is totally different, right? And so that just radically changes in any way, shape, or form how negotiations go down. It starts with us.
Yeah.
You cannot give or get what you don't have for yourself. If you're coming with resentment, shame, guilt, and angst and anger and you've already shut that person down and it's over.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And it's funny because when you think for so long we were conditioned to ignore emotion, right? It has no place in the corporate world whatsoever. Like what a preposterously naive to approach it. I mean, and that's not to say people are like, well, are you saying we need to be emotional? And I'm like, there's a difference between bringing the emotion, awareness around emotion. I'm not saying you have a meltdown in the middle of your negotiations or get angry, but bring your awareness to the table, right? So both for yourself and for the other party.
So I'm so glad you brought that distinction because I say that all the time with sales teams. It's like, because they're like, I don't want to be emotional. We can't be emotional. Like this is a way. And I'm like, we're not talking about being emotional. We're talking about emotional regulation. Because when you get dysregulated, I give this example all the time. In fact, we dealt with this. This is exactly what happened when we dug deep with one of my clients on the sales team. We dug deep with this guy. He's like, I don't know what happened. I rolled up to this door. This dude answered the door and like, I shut down. I could hardly mutter anything. Well, as we dug and asked questions, Cindy, the guy at the door looked like his dad who used to beat him.
Wow.
Talk about emotional dysregulation. So he instantly went, right? Like he totally withdrew. He didn't step into his bold sales self. He totally withdrew because that triggered this pain that he had experienced from his dad because this guy's like his eyes and like the way his mouth was. I mean, we got really detailed on where did this really come from and dug in. Again, we dig into the real deep stuff here, right? We're digging into it, and that completely lost the sale for him because now we get to go back and deal with his triggers about his dad and offer forgiveness and get clean and get healthy about what happened with your dad and move on from that. So he could face his dad every door he goes down, and it's not going to phase him anymore. But that emotional dysregulation lost him that sale.
Yeah, so powerful. And I want to really put a pin in that for our listeners or our viewers out there as well, right? And Brenda and I are both issuing a challenge to you to be able to raise your awareness about your own emotions and the emotional baggage that maybe you're bringing and the fears that attach to those that are maybe stopping you from stepping into your most powerful self. And so that obviously is one reason that negotiations can fail. What do you see as the other key reasons that negotiations tend to fail in your experience?
Honestly, it's a lack of awareness of really getting to the core of what the other person needs.
Yes.
What is your object? Like, what do you really need out of this? What are you hoping? What is your goal? What do you desire?
Yeah.
How can I best serve you through this negotiation? And when you start asking those kind of questions instead of, hey, I've got this product and you need it and I'm going to give it to you and you're shoving it down their throat and you won't let them take the car off the lot unless you're with them in their ear tripping the whole time. Oh, do you see how great it accelerates?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm an adult. I can figure that out. You know what I mean? Right? When you're just like, what do you desire? What's your end goal here? If I can, and I really think that vulnerability on our part as the other party being really clear, can I solve their problem or not?
Yes.
If I can't solve, and I think this is where so much mistrust comes in negotiation because of the conditioning of salespeople, right? And because sales negotiation, right? Like I love that you choose to use negotiation instead of even sales, right? we're not selling you something. We're getting to the best outcome. And when they really trust that we're there for their good,
yes.
and I'll pull the plug if I at any point see this isn't effective, this isn't helpful for you, and I can't solve your issues, then when they know that, now they trust you. You're like, oh, you're willing to not get a paycheck. You're not just here for a paycheck. You actually care for the result and the transformation and the good of my company and my people. Yeah, we really do. Right. And so coming with that genuine desire to care for people the best way you can.
That is such a great answer. I mean, gosh. And it ties back to what we were saying earlier about ego. And I mean, I often say to my client, if you're in a negotiation or a difficult conversation, whether personally or professionally, and you realize that it's about you again and what you want and that you're making it about you, stop, drop, and roll, right? Like just take a pause and immediately flip it back to the other person and what they want, what their outcomes. And if you don't know, then get curious and start asking questions, right? So
yes, girl. Yep.
Such a great answer, Brenda. I love that. Yeah. And what do you see as sort of the key skills or hallmarks? We've talked about some already, but what do you think are the top skill sets that are necessary to make a really great negotiator or salesperson or leader for that matter?
Yeah, empathy is critical. Being able to step into other people's experience because of that lens, the conditional gap, and then our life experience, the lens with which we look. We all come to the table with different experience, different expectations, different viewpoints. What's acceptable to one person may not be acceptable to another based off their conditioning, their experience, right? So when we come to the table understanding this person's not like me, they're not going to see this the way that I see this. They're not going to see, maybe it's blatantly clear to me that they need this help, but they're not going to see that from their perspective, or they already would have done it, right? And so coming from that space of really seeking to understand where they're coming from and then now meeting them at that level. Like, I think that's like foundation number one, where if you don't come from that space, don't even have the conversation, honestly. Just don't.
And so great that we're seeing that shift, because again, a decade ago, even 5 years ago, I mean, focusing on empathy, you'd be sort of laughed out of the room or people would snicker. And now I think we are seeing that increased awareness about just how fundamental that is to effective relationships across the board. So, I can't believe, Brenda, how fast our time's gone. I love this conversation.
Yeah,
I know
me
I'd
too,
like to
Cindy.
wind up by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? Doesn't have to even be around your business. It can be totally disconnected.
Yeah, it's belief in yourself. We are so conditioned with all of this crap. I mean, it's really simple. In fact, somebody posted the other day, like, if you had 3 words to say to yourself, when you were 20, what would you say? And I was like, believe in yourself. We really struggle that that I call it the 2 a.m. voice, right? It wakes us up at 2 a.m. It doesn't tell us you crushed it in the boardroom today. Good job. Like, you're getting a promotion. It's like, you didn't do this. You shouldn't have said that. That slide had a misspelling, right? And it just annihilates us in the night. That's not our voice. We think it's our voice. And we think we're in like competition to proving ourselves to that voice. That's all the conditioning. That's all the news, the Victoria's Secret, that's all the crap that we've been exposed to. It's not our best self, right? And so shutting that voice up, stepping into who because we know innately that we really are capable of rocking it. We really do. But all these things hold us back. And it really just shut it up and believe in yourself and go forward anyway in boldness.
Oh, that is such great advice because it solves so many of the problems that,
It does.
about. I mean, my book
Yep.
just launched last week, and that's one thing.
I know. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Women don't ask, and we set our aspiration levels too low. And, and so much of that ties back to exactly what you just said. Just believe in yourself. So beautiful. Well, Brenda, it has been fabulous having you here. I really enjoyed the conversation. We're going to have to do a follow-up for sure and get you back here so we can peel back even another layer of this. So
yeah, I'd love it.
Tell our listeners, where can they find out more about you? Where should they go?
Sure. Yeah. I'm on social media. It's either _Brenda_Lee, Lee on like Instagram and that kind of stuff. We're on LinkedIn. And then the company website is Modig. It's M as in Mary, ODIG, leadership.com.
Yeah, so beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well for everybody to follow out. I am sure you all have just got loads of not only value, but inspiration and insights, and are able to go away from here feeling energized to show up as the best version of yourself. Make sure you give the gift of sharing as well. Share this episode with other people in your life who you think could benefit. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you have not done that already. We never say no to a good rating or review, so feel free to do that. And just before we sign off today, just wanted to share some ways that we can work together if you're looking to up-level your negotiation skills. I've got everything from online to group to signature one-on-one mastermind experiences available to help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. If that sounds interesting, check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. So until next time, take care.